Fort Lauderdale.
And when she doesn't work with her publishing, she's working on her 120-year-old house. You want to know anything about her relation?
Or if you want to be talked out of it, that too.
She'll be really excited to hear about how to publish science books. And if you feel like interrupting her, don't hesitate. So welcome. We're really happy to have you here.
Thank you. I can just do it manually, just do some running back and forth. Sure. Nope. So, yeah, so. No, it's okay. Just trying to, now it doesn't seem to want to do anything. I think now we made it mad. Uh-oh. All right, so. Okay, so we'll do some running back and forth. First of all, I want to thank you all for this invitation to talk. It's really a pleasure to be here. This is my first trip to UBC and my first trip to Vancouver. And so far I haven't seen very much, but so far what I have seen is very beautiful. I want to thank Kai and Paige and Gunilla and everyone who extended this invitation, and of course you all for coming. First of all, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. Feel free if I, during the course of the talk, start talking too softly or whatever, just let me know to speak up. So as you know, I'm here today to talk to you about book publishing, and more specifically, science book publishing from my perspective as a science editor at a university press, and specifically Princeton University Press. So before I get into the heart of my talk, I thought I would tell you a little bit about what I do and my background. I'm a senior editor at Princeton University Press, where I acquire books in the areas of biology and earth science. These are, of course, big areas, so within this, I tend to focus on areas such as ecology, evolution, conservation, mathematical biology, climate science, behavior, and some allied fields. Basically, it's my job to seek out leading scientists and partner with them in the writing and publication of important books. I work with authors at all stages of the publication process, from developing an idea and shaping a proposal to working on the manuscript itself to later in the process liaising with my colleagues in marketing about how to promote the book. I've been in scholarly publishing for about 10 years and in this position for 7. And when I'm asked to describe my job, I often say basically I get to travel around and talk to leading scientists about really interesting ideas. I get to learn a little about a lot, and I have to say it's a lot of fun. So anyway, my talk today will basically have 2 parts. The first one will be a bit more macro, where I talk a bit about what a university press is, what our mission is, the type of books we publish, and how things are and are not changing, and sort of in light of broader changes in the media and book publishing landscape. And then I'll shift gears to talk about the publishing process, and more specifically how one gets started if you think you might be interested in writing a book. I think there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end, so I encourage everyone to ask questions, because I'm sure there'll be things you're interested in that for whatever reason I don't touch on. So to get started, what's the mission of a university press? I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with the book publishing landscape, so I thought I would say a bit about Princeton University Press and just put it into some context, and I apologize if this is already known to some of you. So Princeton University Press is an independent, nonprofit, scholarly publisher. We focus on publishing books only. There are some university presses, such as the University of Chicago Press, that also publish journals, but we just do books. We're located right on the Princeton campus. We have about 70 employees, and we also have an office just outside Oxford in the UK, and this is pretty unique among university presses, and I mention it because a little later in the talk I'll talk about some of our changes, and we really see ourselves more and more as a global publisher. So the fact we have an office there is actually quite purposeful. The press is also about 100 years old, so we've been around for a while. And our nonprofit status distinguishes us from sort of some commercial presses you might be familiar with, such as Pearson's, a big textbook publisher, or Houghton Mifflin or Penguin, which are large trade houses. We're considered a medium to large size university press, but much smaller than, say, Oxford or Cambridge, which are big UK university presses. And basically, the press sees itself as a highly selective boutique publisher. We publish about 150 new books a year, and this ranges from the humanities to the social sciences to, of course, the sciences. And basically, our mission is to disseminate scholarship of the highest quality. And we do this by seeking out scholars who are recognized as leaders in their field or as important emerging new voices in their areas. And we encourage them to write books. We also, all our books go through a rigorous peer review process, and this is something I'll talk about a little bit more towards the end of the talk. But that basically is the mission of a university press, in particular Princeton. So what is the role of books, and what types of books are we actually interested in publishing? So I would say for a press like Princeton, we think books have a hugely important role when it comes to shaping conversations inside and outside of academia. Now, of course, in the humanities and social sciences, as some of you might know, books are the primary venue for disseminating new information and have a really important role to play when it comes to promotion and tenure. As you know, in the sciences and social sciences, journals are the primary mode of scholarly communication. However, books also really have an important role to play when it comes to putting forward a new theory, teaching a new topic, synthesizing a field, or communicating with a broader audience of, scholars in related disciplines, or even a lay audience. So I thought a good way to illustrate how we see the role of books would be to talk about a few specific books that Princeton has published recently and how we perceive their importance. So currently, editors at Princeton, myself included, focus on publishing what generally fall into 3 genres or types of books. So university presses are often well known for publishing monographs, and some of you might know this, but basically that's a single authored book that presents new research or scholarship, tends to be fairly advanced in the sciences and geared to a particular subfield. So at Princeton, we're known for, one area we're known for is publishing the Monographs in Population Biology series, which has published some classic books, such as The Theory of Island Biogeography by MacArthur and Wilson, and more recently, books such as The Ecological Detective, Neutral Theory by Steve Hubble, and actually Adaptive Diversification by your UBC colleague, Michael DeBelli. And we think these books are important because they advance a new theory, they can open up a whole new line of research, or they can synthesize a research area for graduate students and scholars. So years ago, actually, university presses were really known for only publishing monographs. But at Princeton, at least, we really see it as a fundamental part of our mission to publish other types of scholarly books, and we think they have a really important role to play. So one of these areas is textbooks. So of course, a textbook can introduce students to a field in the context of a course. So we do books such as Tropical Ecology by John Krycha, one of my favorite jackets. But we also see textbooks playing other important roles outside of a classroom context. So we publish textbooks that can make a new method or technique understandable to not only students, but established scholars in a field. So actually a great example of this is also by another UBC author, Sally Otto, her book on mathematical modeling. We also see textbooks synthesizing and even defining a whole new field of scholarship. So one of these, an example of this, we recently published is a book on biophysics, and this is a newer emerging field. And we also do textbooks that can advance pedagogy in a new way. So in a couple years, I'll be doing an introduction to mathematical biology textbook. And it's important because we see it as sort of trying to aspiring to change how this particular subject area is taught. So another format that we publish textbooks in are sometimes called primers. And these books are valuable because they can circulate existing knowledge in a reader-friendly format. So I'm pointing here to the new series we started called the Princeton Primers in Climate. And these are short books on key topics in climate. And we thought these books were important because, as you all probably know, climate science is increasingly relevant for a variety of audiences in a variety of fields. And we perceived a gap between sort of the high-level IPCC report and journal literature and the lower-level popular books. So we have this series by leading climate scientists explaining key facets of climate in such a way that it's easy on the math and really accessible to a broad interdisciplinary audience. So that's the role we see these books playing. There's a few examples here. One on ecosystems and climate. So in addition to monographs and textbooks, we also publish books that are read by non-specialists. And some of these books cut across academic disciplines. So for example, I'll be publishing a book down the road on brain evolution and cognition. And this is a book that we expect to be read by anthropologists, biologists, primatologists, neuroscientists, social scientists. I'm also going to be publishing a book down the road on sustainability science, and that too, we hope will cut across academic disciplines at various disciplines that are interested in this topic. So again, books for sort of a broad academic audience. We are also interested in books that are often called trade books. They're called trade books because they're sold in mainstream bookstores, they're reviewed in leading magazines and newspapers, and they're written without specialized jargon, and they often tell a compelling story or advance a novel argument. So a trade book can mean something different depending on the publisher. For a press like Princeton, a trade book is typically written by someone who has some prior experience communicating with a broader public, or at least with a non-specialist audience. They can often emerge from a general education course someone is taught, or of course from a scholar's own research or expertise. I think the key thing here is we don't see trade books as separate from the scholarly world. We think they're important because they bring to the attention of a broader public the findings of a discipline or the ideas of a scholar. So these aren't sort of separate things. Again, I'll point to a few examples, not only from the sciences, but from other areas the press publishes. So we published this book, The Whites of Their Eyes by Jill Lepore, about the Tea Party, an endless topic of fascination. But she's a historian at Harvard who also writes for The New Yorker. We published this book, This Time is Different, 8 Centuries of Financial Folly, by Reinhardt and Rogoff, and this was a really important book on the financial crisis. Give you a few examples from the sciences. Published this book by Michael Nielsen called Reinventing Discovery, and this is about how the internet is changing collective intelligence and the way science is done. Another example of what we call popular science, this is by Andy Knoll, a biologist at Harvard. It's about early evolution on Earth. And then there's Honeybee Democracy by Tom Seeley, which is a great book that tells the story of how tiny brain bees make the collective decision of where to build their new nest every year and what humans can learn about better decision making as a result. And all of these books, basically, what they have in common is they were widely reviewed in leading magazines and newspapers, and they were discussed both inside and outside of academia. So for Princeton, when we think about a broad academic book or a trade book, we still think pretty specifically about audience. So for us, a trade book doesn't necessarily mean it's for everyone or for all lay readers. We still think pretty specifically about constituency. So in the case of Tom's book, we're interested in readers of popular science, people who are interested in animal behavior, decision making, or of course, honeybees. If you're writing a more argument-driven book, I think it's really important to think about, we like to think about who the stakeholders are and whose minds you want to change with your book. And I will say also, these sort of books I'm speaking to, these sort of broadly academic books or sophisticated trade books, I think they have an even more important role to play in our current digital and media book publishing landscape, and this is something I'll return to in the next section of the talk. So those are essentially the types of books Princeton publishes. I will say, lest you think we take ourselves too seriously, we do publish some things that are a bit more lighthearted, still grounded in great scholarship, but also quite fun. We have the quotable Einstein. We have a philosopher's take on why there is so much BS out there. This is a hugely successful little book. And for anybody looking to not buy Christmas presents this year, here's an economist who can tell you why you shouldn't. All right, so to what extent is book publishing changing for a press like Princeton? So I'm not going to attempt to talk about all changes in the book publishing world here, and I should say also how a publisher experiences these changes varies from press to press. So what a fiction publisher might experience is going to be different from a university press, and even a fairly large university press such as us is going to be different from a small one. That said, it's a changing time for the book business, particularly over the last several years. There are fewer outlets for traditional book reviews, there are fewer bookstores, and of course, how people read books and consume books has changed with the explosion of ebooks and the general availability of content on the internet. So what does this all mean for us as a press? And basically, I'll touch on three specific areas. There's content, there's how we sell and promote our books, and where and how we disseminate our books. So as you can probably tell, Princeton is very much in the business of disseminating great content. So how then does the tremendous amount of free online content from journal articles and MOOCs to Wikipedia affect what we do as a publisher? So on the one hand, I would say it doesn't change things for us. The core mission really remains the same in that our goal is to publish important books by leading thinkers in academia. But on the other hand, I think the changing landscape does serve to clarify the unique role that books can play. And I think books can often play a role that's not necessarily served by blogs and MOOCs and everything else that's out there. So I'll point to just a few examples. Of course, internet and open access journals, among other things, are a great way to access information. It's a great way to get information out quickly. But I think it makes it tougher to find great synthesis. So one thing we think books play a crucial role of is synthesizing large bodies of knowledge in accessible and authoritative and interesting ways. I would also say a book provides a forum in which an idea or a topic can be explored in more depth or maybe with more authorial voice that's possible in some other formats. So I think that's another way a book fulfills a unique role. And I would also say that because a book is actually complementary to and not really in conflict with these other forms of communication, I think a book can insert itself and expand upon conversations that are already happening in other forums, whether it's journals, blogs, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of how this affects us, I would say perhaps more than ever, editors of Princeton are really seeking out authors who can bring together whole fields or large ideas for that, whether that's a broad scholarly audience or an interested lay audience. Authors who can do this, I think, in really effective and unique ways. I think there's an audience for that. I think this is valuable in all fields, but I think the sciences in particular, areas such as you know, such as global change, conservation, study of human behavior, just to name a few, aren't necessarily the purview of a single discipline. So a book can be a great forum to bring ideas together that may not necessarily speak to each other. My authors actually often tell me that in writing a book, one of the most rewarding things is that it forced them to sort of maybe read outside areas that might connect to their field, but they don't read normally. So shifting a little bit, how we sell and promote our books. That's changing a bit too. So many independent bookstores are still doing well, but some are closing, and as are big chains as well. I don't know, is Borders up here, or was it up here as well? I don't know, but no. Anyway, Borders, similar to Barnes & Noble, closed recently. So bookstores are changing as well. So won't come to as a surprise probably to anyone here that places such as Amazon and Apple are becoming, or have been for a while, the primary sales venues for us. So against this backdrop then, publicity and promotion, which have always been important, take on a whole new significance because it becomes even less likely that someone's just going to discover one of our books in a bookstore. So traditionally, a publicity department, particularly in the case of books for broader audiences, would rely on book reviews in magazines, and particularly newspapers, to drive attention for a book and in turn sales. But in recent years, the traditional book review that you might find in a newspaper has really shrunk. So this has changed how we bring attention. There are just fewer outlets for books to get reviewed. They're still there, but they're fewer. But I would say the growth of blogs, for example, has really opened whole new doors in terms of book promotion. In many ways, bloggers have filled a gap left by the traditional book review. So we actively engage with the publisher with bloggers, leading bloggers in a particular field, and try and get our books to their attention. And I would say also, as I mentioned, that while maybe sort of big newspapers and such aren't doing as many book reviews, I think they are really interested in sort of author expertise. So we may not necessarily be promoting our book for review, but we might be promoting our author's ideas. So we might promote to the New York Times an author for their room for debate section or their scientist at work section to just get our authors out there in a new way. I would say also more than ever for authors, they're really involved in the promotion of their books, particularly in the promotion of their ideas broadly. So we encourage our authors to write op-eds, to contribute to meaningful blogs, to use social media to the extent that they're interested, and just, more than ever be sort of involved in the promotion of their books. So in sum, I say what we're trying to do in terms of how things have changed with sort of the promotion of our books is we're really trying to start a conversation about an author and his or her ideas across a variety of platforms, whether it's still the magazine or newspaper, or whether it's blogs, social media, et cetera. Trying to insert our authors' ideas in a lot of different conversations in a lot of different forums. So lastly, I'm going to say a little bit about how we produce and disseminate our books and how's that changing. For a press like Princeton, the physical book still actually remains really important. It is still the majority of our sales come from sales of the physical book. But of course, ebooks are creeping up. There's more and more interest in people purchasing ebooks. So like a lot of publishers, all our new books come out as ebooks. We are also starting to experiment with new kind of multimedia ways of getting our books out there and their content. So my colleague who handles we have a big natural history field guide program. And my colleague Robert develops apps for a lot of his field guides. The press is actually doing its first enhanced ebook this coming spring. It's a book by Steve Palumbi called The Extreme Life of the Sea, and it'll have about 20 videos of him in interesting places and whatnot. So it's new, and we'll see how that goes. For our more scholarly titles, we've partnered, I don't know if you know what JSTOR is, but basically they allow people to search and in some cases download to their university libraries parts of our books, and this is more for our monographs. So those are some of the ways in sort of the kind of dissemination of our content is changing a bit. And the last thing I'll say is it's really important to us, and I alluded to this earlier, not only sort of how we get our ideas out there, but where. And we really see ourselves more and more as a global publisher. We've always published books that, for an international audience, but this is increasingly important, and we place a big premium on being able to sell our books around the world and also get them translated. China is actually our biggest translation partner, most interested in translating our books these days. So in sum, I would say book publishing is changing for us along the lines I described. For us, the core goal remains the same, publish the best ideas we can. But I think I would like to also say that these changes make it an exciting time to both publish and write a book. I think there's a real audience, I think, for books with big ideas that are well written, that can appeal across fields and to international audiences. So now I'm going to shift gears a bit. The publishing process and how to get started. I'm mostly going to focus on how to get started. If anyone, I'll say at the end, has more questions and sort of, what happens along the way, I'm obviously happy to speak to that. So some of this advice is generic, and of course, but it's primarily geared to people who are thinking about writing a science book. So if you think you might be interested in writing a book, it's of course good to think about your idea and why a book might be the ideal forum. Perhaps you've written lots of articles or an annual review, but you have a lot more to say on the topic, then a monograph could be a good idea. If you teach a course, and not only do you think maybe there isn't a book, or maybe you don't like the existing books, or maybe you just want to change how students think about this area for sort of future generations, then it's worth considering a textbook. Or of course, if you enjoy communicating with a broader audience, non-scientists, you think you have an interesting story to tell or an important argument, then it's worth thinking about a book as well. I would say for any sort of genre, I think it's really important to think about the expertise that you as an author bring to the topic. One of the main marketing tools any publisher has is the expertise and point of view of the author. So just think about sort of what you contribute as far as your background and expertise as a scientist or a social scientist. Then, of course, I'm always asked about sort of the time involved in writing a book. There's not really one great answer. You can always talk to people who've done it. But, frankly, if you have a sabbatical, it's probably possible to write a book in a year. If not, if you're balancing this against writing articles, running a lab, teaching, et cetera, then it's going to require more time. And it's thinking about where it's going to fit in, if there are things you can, put on hold for a while. But as you can probably tell, I think it's a very worthwhile investment of time. Then I would say it's a good idea to research what else is out there. Making sure that what you want to say hasn't been said, making sure you have a sort of novel, important contribution to make. Any publisher is going to want to know where your book fits in the broader publishing landscape of what's out there. This is true for any book, but particularly for a textbook or a more general book where we're often publishing into frankly, a more crowded market. I always encourage then authors to get some ideas on paper. This doesn't necessarily have to be a formal book proposal yet, but I think it's a good idea to think about, what your core argument is and how might you organize it. What will push the reader from one chapter to the next? How will the thread of your argument carry through? And what takeaway point you want to leave the reader with? So after you have a kind of preliminary sense of what your idea is and the potential audience and how it might fit in, it's not a bad time to consider approaching a publisher. It could seem early, but I actually like to have informal conversations fairly early on in the process. A publisher usually has pretty good insight. An editor can have a good insight into the market for the book, can help you sort of frame your argument and organization, can also can point you to another press if that particular press isn't the right fit. Actually, because one of the things I consider in whether to take on a book is you can probably tell publishers such as Princeton trying to develop an identity for sort of their list and what they're doing. So I think a lot about whether a book fits with what we do as a publisher. Of course, you need to know what publisher to approach. You can obviously talk to your colleagues, but as I said, it's a good idea to just kind of research what else a publisher does in a particular genre or field to make sure it's a good fit. Most publishers will ask you to write a formal book proposal at some point. If anyone's interested, I can sort of go into what's involved in that, but it's sort of just a step in the process. And then basically we do an internal and external review of this, and peer review is really important to a press like Princeton, so I'll typically send a book proposal out to a couple people, experts in the field, who can speak to, the potential importance of the book, the author's argument, the need for the book, and we also get the whole manuscript reviewed at the end of the process. And I also share everything with my colleagues in-house, particularly in marketing and sales and editorial, as it's really important as a small press that everyone sort of buy into the book and there's a collective understanding of the book's potential and everyone sort of shares then basically usually if everyone is enthusiastic, reviewers, me, et cetera, then typically a contract will be issued for the book, and then the process goes from there. I will say, if anyone is thinking about publishing and sort of some things to consider in a publisher, obviously, as I alluded, thinking about the fit is a good thing to think about. Who the editor is, how she sees her role, what sort of support the press offers in terms of finances, helping produce the book, figures of that nature. And most importantly, does the press sort of share your vision for the book and who it's meant to reach and whose minds it's meant to change. And as I said, I'm not going to spend too much time getting into sort of the what happens next in terms of how the book is produced or marketed and editorial development. But if anyone's specifically interested in that, I'm happy to speak to that. And I should say, there are actually several good books about, generally communication and book publishing. I just point to a few here. We were talking over lunch. There's also another one by Randy Olson, I believe, called Don't Be Such a Scientist, which I think is a good one too. But these are all, I think, quite clear, sort of good introductions to just writing serious nonfiction and publishing in particular. So that's what I have, and I'm obviously happy to entertain any questions. Thank you. What's entailed? Sure. Yeah, so what I typically ask for is a page or two that lays out the idea. I mean, I'm really focused on really what this book is about. So I ask for something that just says, answers that question. What is this book about? What is its core argument or core story? And a bit about give me a sense for how that will unfold in the book. So usually a couple of pages about that. Then I ask for an annotated table of contents, which is maybe a paragraph or two on the content of each chapter. So those are the most important components, along with a statement from you, excuse me, about who you see as the audience for your book, what sort of expertise you'll assume on the part of the reader, and also, as I said, what else is out there, how your book fits into sort of an ongoing conversation, why it's different from that book on climate. My book advances this argument. And then it's more detailed things like, best guess as to how long it will take, how long it will be, how many figures you'll have, and that's not set in stone. But I mean, the book proposal, I think, serves a couple different functions. It's obviously a great exercise for the author in terms of, figuring out how you'll say this. It's also, frankly, kind of your sales document to the press. And it's not to say you should be sort of hyperbolic in it, but it's sort of your opportunity to introduce your book to the people who are going to promote it and sell it and publish it. So it serves, and it's also for peer reviewers to evaluate. So it serves several different functions. Does that answer your question? Oh, I was told to repeat questions, so forgot to do that. Yes. 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 How do we achieve? Right. So we actually primarily publish textbooks at the advanced undergraduate to graduate level. So these are smaller markets than we're not going to publish your intro bio or intro or science textbook. And we also publish our books, typically 10 to 20% less, particularly textbooks, than a commercial press might. So our mission really is to disseminate scholarship, and we price competitively as a result. I mean, we do have to make money to keep doing what we're doing, but everything is reinvested into the press. We don't have shareholders or anything like that. So that's what we do. Does that? Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, to be honest, there's a place for sort of the edited collection and that. We don't publish a lot of those because actually what we find is kind of the single or co-author book and this sort of author's voice who's able to kind of bring this all together in a single argument, drawing on various disciplines actually works better in a book format for us.
Honestly speaking, do you think outside promotion in 10 years, will be a market for publishing?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's particularly, in the sciences, of course, books aren't, done for promotion and tenure. And, a lot of these books are quite successful, and they're done for other reasons, to, move a field forward, to shape pedagogy, to communicate with a broader non-scholarly audience, to open up a research area. So, yeah, I think they're definitely, and, our books are, doing quite well and achieving their audiences. It depends on the type of a book. For a monograph in population biology, a typical print run might be 1,000 copies to start. For a more advanced undergraduate to graduate level text, we might print 5,000. For a book for a broader audience, we might print 3 to 5 to 10 to start, depending. So it really varies on our kind of assessment of, how broad the market is. Yes. More popular, go out and, sure. Yep. I mean, we publish books that we consider, trade books for a general lay audience that are reviewed in mainstream publications. So we do this across every field we publish in: science, social science, humanities. I mean, a few of those examples I pointed to, but many others. Mm-hmm. Yes? Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Did everyone hear the question? Yeah, okay. Background of, sure. So the background of the editors choosing the books. I would say it varies. So thinking about my colleagues, there are about 12 or 13 editors at Princeton. Some have a PhD in the field in which they acquire. I think our history editor, for example, has a PhD in history, and some don't, such as myself. I have a BA in history, but just got really interested and excited about science and science publishing. My colleague who acquires our physics books has a BA in English. So our math editor, she has an undergraduate degree in mathematics, and I believe taught high school math for a while. So it varies quite a bit, and I think more of what we see ourselves kind of bringing to the table is obviously an expertise in publishing, and it's really my job to get to know the disciplines in which I'm acquiring books, get to know what ideas scholars are excited about, what courses they teach, who else they're in conversation with, so that the publishing we do reflects the fields, and also, frankly, is a little forward thinking, where we are maybe anticipating fields going, trying to maybe publish ahead a little bit. So that's how we, at least how I as an editor see my role, is trying to have an understanding of the fields, of the audience, of the market of publishing for my author, and then working with them in that way. In the sciences, I'm usually going to people. Not always, but it's very much reaching out to people at conferences, on campus visits, through other means. If I see someone who wrote a really interesting article in Scientific American, I might write to them and say, hey, you want to turn this into a book or something. So it's very much approaching potential authors. It's a little different in the humanities, where, of course, people need to write books for tenure, and they're more actively seeking out publishers. So yeah, it's mostly me going out. Not always. People do come to me with good ideas, but it is more that. So the question is, are there sort of specific numbers we aim for, or is it is it freer than that? I would say both. I do have the luxury at Princeton of being very idea-driven, that I'm primarily interested in really going out and finding great ideas. But yeah, I mean, certainly there are sort of number of books that we think about. I mean, actually for Princeton, we're thinking these days we're doing actually fewer books and trying to do more impactful books. So for a press like this, it's not really, for a press like Princeton, it's not really about volume. It's about, trying to, do fewer, make sure we do them well, and try to the extent possible to choose books that, we think have potential to make impact, whether that's an impact within a field, impact in the classroom, or impact more broadly. So of course, we do as a publisher have to plan and think ahead. So we can't, for example, in one publishing season have 5 books and the next have 100. So we do aim for some kind of continuity. But yeah, I mean, so there's sort of loose goals I have to operate on. And obviously, I do think it's important for me, for my list to, be balanced in the types of books we do, in terms of doing some more specialized books, some broader books. Because I think they each serve a discipline in a different way. Kai? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a good question. What is responsible for that? I don't know that there's one specific thing responsible for that, and I don't think it's a sudden change. I think it's something we've probably been moving to as a press for many years. So I think it's just, starting to manifest itself. But yeah, I mean, I think it might speak to what I was saying about kind of really seeing the unique role more and more books can play. What is the role of books in sort of this broader landscape we have in sort of the media and digital world? And recognize, okay, we have access to sort of great scientists and scholars and thinkers, and they can really make an important contribution, sort of, writing sort of maybe big idea books and things like that. Sort of really sort of focusing that mission and seeing it that way, I think maybe is causing us to say, hey, we should do more of this. And that's, doing those books which might be more impactful and sort of, instead of maybe just doing everything. Not that, I don't think the press ever did, but I don't know if that totally answered. Yep.
So in terms of other university press,
Mm-hmm.
given that it is a fairly selective landscape,
Yep.
do you see yourself as kind of all on the same team, or are you, out there battling against other presses and wanting to, get all the best ideas?
It is competitive, so there's no question about it. I mean, I'd say it's friendly. I mean, I know all my colleagues, fellow editors at other presses, and it's generally a really good bunch. If you're ever at a conference, you should meet the editors. They tend to be very nice people. But it is competitive. I mean, I do, depending on the genre, the type of book, I might compete against Oxford University Press or University of Chicago Press or Harvard, or my colleague who, we have a new neuroscience list, so he might run up against MIT Press. For our more sort of trade books, certainly, I mean, we often are interested in the same types of books as a Norton or a Basic Books. And even for textbooks, there's presses such as Sinauer, which are quite good, that we're also interested. So it is a competitive world, actually. So while our missions might be quite similar, we all are looking to, grab the best.
People think about the publishing world that it's hard to, get someone who's interested.
Mm-hmm.
But is it often different from the university press world that you think interested, that it's often the same?
So you mean, I'm not sure I totally understand.
Well, I guess that I just think
No.
but the general perception that it is difficult to publish because it's hard to get the attention of
Right.
publishers.
Right.
But in terms of competition, it might be that you're after.
Right. I think that might be, I mean, we're often after the same areas or after the same scholars. So, yeah, there can be, competition that way. If we choose, I find something really exciting, another press might find it really exciting too. Yeah, I mean, it's because I think also, right, I mean, I would worry a little if no other publisher were ever interested in the sort of books I was doing, because then I would think, okay, I'm really maybe doing something wrong. Maybe I'm too, I'm operating too much in my own world. Yes? Right, so I obviously acquire in biology and earth science. So I would say associate professor through full professor are usually when I'm talking to people. I will sometimes talk to assistant professors and sometimes PhD students and postdocs, but it is more unusual. It is more unusual. It's usually people are past the tenure process and sort of reached a time. It's a good time to think about pulling some ideas into a book. No, I mean, not that I mean, it's just, I mean, if I do talk to assistant professors in the sciences, it's just, 9 times out of 10, the response I get is, I can't think about a book until I achieve tenure through publishing papers. So, I just know it's not necessarily the right time to be thinking about a book for most scientists, that they, put it off till they have the tenure process cleared and then can think about it, which is typically at the associate or professor level. I have some authors who have dived in sooner, and that's perfectly fine. I'm open to it. It's just, it's more unusual. And certainly, as I said, in the humanities and social sciences, it's a whole different ballgame. Is that it? All right. Thank you very much. Hopefully it's helpful.